everyone, and welcome back to the Haynes Report podcast. I'm Carole Haynes. In this episode, I'm discussing Maoism American style. For the past several years, we have watched as the cultural revolution sweeps across the nation. People were shocked at events that took place in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. Do you ever hear people say, this country's gone wacky? Or after hearing the latest stories from the news, do you say, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of? People do wonder what's happening. They want to know why it's happening, where it's all leading. Well, in fact, there's a decades-long sinister plot to gradually turn America into a full-blown communist nation. Yet few have been aware that this was happening, except they would see changes around them, and first gradually and then very rapidly. So I, along with a number of others, have committed our time and our life to informing other Americans about this plot and publishing articles and producing podcasts, and we share conservative news to educate the public. Well, since about 2017, we've been talking about the Marxist cultural revolution a lot that's gripping our nation. However, not as much has been discussed about Maoism. So let's begin by first defining Maoism. It's officially called the Mao Zedong thought by the Chinese Communist Party, which is a CCP for the acronym, and it's a variety of Marxism-Leninism. Well, Marxism-Leninism was the first official ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. It's a combination of classical or orthodox Marxism, which were the works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and Leninism, which was the thoughts of Vladimir Lenin. Mao developed this ideology to begin a socialist revolution in the agricultural, pre-industrial society of the Republic of China, and then later on, the country's name was changed to the People's Republic of China. So it's my hope that after you listen to today's podcast, that you'll better understand who Mao was and just how his brutal tactics have been implemented in America. It's very critical that you recognize these tactics and their purpose so that you can get engaged and you can help stop them. It's going to be up to every person out there if we turn this around, because it's like stopping a big steamship that has continued to grow so far, but we can do it if we work together. So let's start first by looking at the origins of our American cultural revolution. Get a little background here. Here's a term that was made very famous by Mao. Never forget the class struggle. Never forget the class struggle. This proclamation by communist dictator Mao, and that was in 1962, became a frenzied chant that just paved the way, went all over China. It paved the way for the Chinese Cultural Revolution that was launched by Mao in 1966. Well, he had two motives for this. The first one was to purge, get rid of his political enemies, and then second, to become the supreme leader of the entire country of China. Well, this cultural revolution continued from 1966 until his death in 1976, but its violent legacy has impacted Chinese politics and society for decades. Mao's leadership position had been weakened by his failure, his program called Great Leap Forward. And if you're not familiar with that, you might do a little research on it. But this came before this cultural revolution. It was a total failure. His communist policies caused this great famine, and it caused the death of millions of people. Hunger was so widespread that people even resorted to cannibalism, eating each other. To keep attention away from himself, Mao blamed the famine on class enemies. Party officials tried to do the same to escape public scrutiny by accusing others of being rightists. They called them capitalist roaders or revisionists. They later started calling them spies and traitors. Well, this sounds like Democrats who accuse Republicans of doing the very things that they're doing, but they're doing this to accuse the Republicans to divert attention away from what they're actually doing. In 1966, Mao gathered a group of radicals and he launched his cultural revolution. Remember that he was trying to regain power and to get rid of his political enemies. Mao shut down schools. He wanted those students freed up full time. He called for students to mobilize and to target leaders who were not eager for revolution. Not everybody wanted revolution, and so some of them he thought were just too timid, and he had to get rid of them. And also he wanted to get rid of anybody who had, quote, bourgeois values. And that was the negative term in his mind. It means that they were conventional thinkers who believed in the ownership of private property. Well, this means they were soft. They were soft on his agenda. So they had to be gotten rid of. During this early phase of the Cultural Revolution, a number of communist leaders were removed from power. They were beaten, and they were imprisoned and murdered. Students did form this Red Guard. They attacked and they harassed the elderly and intellectuals. They promoted class division and hatred and envy. The Red Guard shouted slogans such as "destruction before construction" as they raged through these Chinese cities and cultural institutions to destroy what Mao called ghosts and monsters. He always had something to confuse people, but he always wanted to create a negative thought about them. Well, these savage youth, these Red Guards, got free rides on trains. They had free places to stay, free food, everything free. They also were freedom from arrest. Well, does this sound like Antifa and BLM protesters? They were getting everything handed to them. They could march in and take what they wanted, and the police were told to stand down. Now, the Red Guard began to have internal fights, and it was to try to, see which one, because factions developed. So they were fighting each other internally for dominance. Well, as they did, they just created more violence and more chaos in the country. By 1967, so many Chinese cities were on the brink of anarchy that Mao sent in army troops to restore order. Red Guards were forced into rural areas, and many were imprisoned or killed. And these useful idiots had served their purpose, and they were now disposed of. Useful idiots in America will be disposed of also when they no longer needed by the party or by the leftists. We have a Red Guard here, and I'm saying Red Guard, they don't necessarily call it that, but it's our youth who are protesters, and they're the political activists, and they think that nothing is going to stop them because they don't understand history. If they understood what went on during this 1966 through 1976 under the Cultural Revolution, or even under other dictators, once they are not needed, these people are always disposed of, totally disposed of. It's happened with every dictator. With Mao's revolution, chaos engulfed the country, and the Chinese economy just plummeted. Industrial production dropped below the 1966 rates. People were really suffering at this point. Mao urged people to get rid of the 4 O's. Now remember these 4 O's because we can see them in our own country. The 4 O's were old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. They wanted to change social norms, which they did. A one-sex, genderless society was promoted. Girls were dressing like boys and soldiers, and confusion and social chaos were created. They even banned dating in schools. They wanted the students focused totally on this activism, not on anything that was any different. They wanted their full attention devoted to helping Mao. The Chinese Communist Party controlled the press, and they controlled the media. They used them for daily propaganda to silence all dissidents, and also to ban books, songs, music, art, comedies that were not politically correct, that Mao did not approve. Well, let's look at Maoist wokeism, because we're hearing this wokeism, that word, in our country. Maoism differs from the orthodox or the classical Marxism, that's the original Marxism, which is economic, and it means that the economic base of a social system determines its culture, its language, its ideas. All this economic basis affects everything else. Marxism is an ideology by Karl Marx. It's a theory, it was an ideology. It was social, political, and fiscal theory, and it focused on struggles between capitalists and the working class. This was sort of the haves and the have-nots, but this was, again, that same thing, the working class. The class war under this classical Marxism was supposed to be over once the state takes over the means of production, meaning the factories, the banks, the businesses, and so forth. However, Maoism is different. It bans private ownership of property, and it teaches that revolution is never going to stop. It's going to continue to ever. You know, we get this message from critical race theory supporters in America who claim that racism will never end because whites are just permanently guilty. No matter how much they bow to Marxist demands, there will always be racism as long as they're whites. So what they want to do is to get rid of whites, and then there won't be racism. Well, this is and of course, a new segregation has arisen in America. We have socialists in the West. Let's say these were in Europe, they tended to focus on theory. They would discuss Hegelian dialectics and Marxist criticism of Hegel, and then the Frankist schools picking apart of Karl Marx. Well, here in America, we've got seminars and conferences and webinars and podcasts all about the theories of Marx and Herbert Marcuse and some of the other Marxists. But Maoism doesn't focus on theory. It focuses on action. Violent action, in fact. Maoists found these abstract dialectics and the intellectualizing of European Marxist thinkers really boring when they compared it with action stuff like revolution and tearing down statues and canceling somebody else out. That was far more fun. Mao was a very, very shrewd strategist. Instead of using the Marxist terms of oppressor and oppressed, he used the terms that the Chinese people understood: class enemy, or the people, or the people's enemy. Well, using identity politics, Mao created arbitrary classes of society to divide the people. The oppressors were the 5 black classes, and the oppressed were the 5 red classes. And so when you break it down, there were 2 main classes, a total of 10 classes, but there was a dividing line. You had the black classes, who were the oppressors. Then over here on the other side, you had the oppressors, who were the 5 red classes, and they were the evil ones. The Maoist concept of class was defined by a state of mind, not by birth. You could be guilty by birth or by relationship or an association or words or deeds. It was a state of mind. For that, you could lose your job, you could lose your life, you could be in prison. Even though you might be born in the red class or the oppressed class, you know you could be the black oppressor if you just had the wrong attitude. Families and neighbors were told to snitch on each other, and children were told their parents were not as important as Mao. Children were urged to change their last name if their parents were the oppressor red class. The oppressor black class. So if you were from a red class, that was a bad thing, and so you should. So children, I'll go back. Children were urged to change their last names if their parents were the oppressor black class, because they wanted to get away from that. They did not want to be embarrassed by their parents who were the oppressors. They wanted to become the good class, the 5 red classes. Now, from the beginning, almost, Maoism has been especially focused on thought control. Well, that's just another name, as you know, for brainwashing. Maoist struggle sessions forced people to denounce and to conform, to make false confessions, to just outright lie. But they had to accept the party's lies. It didn't matter, just as long as they accepted it, whether they believed it or whatever. They just had to go along to get along. People were forced to write self-criticism essays and participate in often violent struggle sessions meant to root out any thoughts critical of the Communist Party. In fact, the communist cadres were constantly being re-educated just to make sure that their thoughts were the politically correct, pure thoughts. Mao's communist regime of divide and conquer produced the deadliest episode in modern history, surpassing even modern-day dictators such as Stalin, who killed military troops. But Mao killed people. He had citizens kill each other. So it wasn't between the military. He just went after the people. Between 40 to 80 million people died during this 1966-1976 period from starvation, persecution, prison labor, mass executions. Many were tortured to death, commonly after forced confessions to fake crimes. Children, even infants, were sometimes brutally murdered. Victims were sometimes cannibalized in frenzied bloodlust, just like crazy people. Students sometimes even beat their teachers to death. Well, let's look at Maoism in American life. America has reinvented Maoism. Mao's tactics, rhetoric, and symbols have been adopted, though, in BLM protests and riots, anti-racist self-education doctrine, and the promotion of critical race theory in schools, corporations, the government, the military. Cancel culture is widespread. It's become a well-known term, and people are forced to literally bow, take a knee to leftist demands. You see the athletes doing this. You see people in the streets being forced to get down on their knees. And they think that if they do this, that it will be better for them. That's wrong, because what happens is found out how weak they are and how much that they can be pushed around. The American version of the Maoist struggle session, and that's another term, struggle session, is, quote, woke self-criticism. The unconscious bias training that you hear and corporations or the government will call for, that's simply another term for brainwashing or thought control that was really big under Mao. Another aspect of Maoism that has negatively impacted us here in America is this emphasis on rage. And the rage goes along with revolutionary, that is the thinking of violence and chaos. This idea of rage is different from the critical theory of German Marxists. Remember that this was more of the conversation, the debate. With rage, there's no debate of ideas. There's no use of logic. There's no persuasion. Rage is far more powerful than the general left's critical thinking and dialectical exchange. Well, Maoists are always offended. Anything that comes up offends them. They're just permanently offended. And they're constantly searching for new ways they can be offended, for new victims and new oppressors, so the new ideology can sustain itself. Otherwise, it will just burn out. They do this through DEI. You've been hearing a lot about this lately in the United States. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We here in Texas has passed a ban by our Texas legislature, a ban against DEI at the university, but only in the hiring. Unfortunately, they left it at the curriculum level where the professors could come in and actually teach this in the classroom, so that has to be taken care of at some point. Otherwise, it will continue on. And we have these DEI offices in education, university, and K through 12, in governments, and I'm talking about even at the federal level. And I have talked about that recently, about DEI at the federal level, and I've written about it, done podcasts. So you might check out my website on this at www.drcarolehaynes.com. This is happening in corporations, the media. DEI is the rage, but this is how that they can control people, and they can victimize people. The left is penalizing, they're marginalizing, they're humiliating oppressors, but they're granting privilege to the left's list of oppressed. And that these people who are oppressed are seen as permanent victims. And if you're white, you're a permanent oppressor. Well, the term of merit, or the idea of meritocracy and progress and opportunity, these are old-fashioned, racist, and offensive. We no longer are talking about Americanism or equality under God and the law. America has become a nation of self-loathing people. So we're being taught to hate ourselves, and that is wrong, because we've been a nation that was so proud of our people and what we have accomplished and how we have gotten there. Those of us who are conservative, religious, and who support our founding principles and a limited government are considered to be the enemy. We're the oppressors. The Maoist cancel culture is rapidly erasing our historical memory on a daily basis of what America was, its founding principles, and our religion, our culture, people, history, heritage, our traditions, our holidays. The Maoist goal is to leave nothing, absolutely nothing for us to remember the America that we once knew. That's why old people are being targeted, because they remember. But today's youth have been indoctrinated with communism, and they're not taught the facts about their history. They don't know what life was like 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. So different. 60 years ago, 100 years ago. It was so radically different from America to what it is today. Even just when I came to Texas, I walked into a bank and I just said, I want to open a checking account. No problem. I got a checking account. They didn't ask for anything, all the ID. They didn't search me, hound me, or anything else, do a background check. I just got a bank account. Today, it is just a totally different picture of trying to even go into a bank account and to open a bank account. All these youth today know is the culture, the new culture, without any Western Christian traditions and values. They know only the words and the thoughts that are politically correct. Well, let's look at a few of the millions of examples of Maoism in America. Well, we have bans on books, songs, music, art, comedies that are not politically correct. The Western classical arts, which are very closely connected with Christianity, and that you get back into these classical composers, they often had things in there about God, Christ, Jesus, angels. All this is under attack, and I've discussed this at length in other things that I have put out, articles and podcasts. And again, please check out my website on that, and you will find a lot of information. And I have some exciting things upcoming on that in the future, that a lot that I would be working on the Western classical arts, because if some of you already know, I am a classically trained pianist as well as a classically trained organist, and that was my career. And so with that becomes a whole different world that we live in, and understanding the arts, and when I see what's happening and why, and people are not aware of what's happening and why it's happening, and how it's gotten into the music. I'm talking about even rock and roll and things with the Beatles, all kinds of things that are part of that, and I'll get into that at a later time. Well, the movie Gone with the Wind and the song Dixie, that's a Southern song. Of course, that is supposed to be totally banned. The novels To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn, these have all been banned. A picture of Jesus was covered at the Catholic Notre Dame Cathedral University when Obama spoke there several years ago. They just put, the picture of Jesus was behind Obama, and he wanted it covered with a black drape. Picture that. There's some new approved art, though, and if you'll check my website out again, you can find pictures of it. It's called Crucifix in Urine. And what they've just done is they have it's a jar of urine, and they've dropped a cross in there, and that's supposed to be acceptable. Well, what it is damning Christianity. And this was at a national, of art, the National Museum of Art. So you have to say, this is really evil, but this is where they want to start trying to batter our minds, to make us so psychologically that we feel that everything has gone wrong. We can't accept it. They want us to feel that way. They want us to feel overwhelmed. We can't allow that. We should throw that art down, and you just simply say, actually throw it out. The way I saw one mother in one of these videos that came across yesterday, she walked into a classroom and she tore down the flag, the rainbow flag, and the teacher tried to put it back up. She threw it in the garbage can. She says, "You will not do this. I'm paying you. I'm a taxpayer, and I'm paying you to teach my child history and math and science, and you're not to do this. You're not going to do it." And they went back and forth, and the parent was just adamant, and the teacher finally just didn't know what to do. She started on her phone calling for help, but the mom just said, and she moved the trash can aside and said, "You will not put this back up. You will not." We have to do that. We have to push back and say, this is not okay. This kind of art, this kind of music, this kind of whatever is not acceptable in America. Well, here's another example. Students and adults are being subjected to public shaming, to denouncing and self-criticism on a wide basis, including by public K through 12 schools, universities, corporations, government agencies. All whites are deemed white supremacists and racist. People who are critical of the Maoist ideology or have the wrong attitude are subjected to re-education. And they're doing this. They do this for teachers. They're doing it in corporations. They're doing it at the government level. And you have it even goes into the military. Students are attacking teachers. Remember that I said that under Maoism that some students actually murdered their teachers? Well, in 2019, the National Education Association, which is a teachers union, reported that students as young as 5 years of age are biting, they're kicking, punching, throwing items, and they're urinating on teachers, and they're lashing out in other destructive ways. Federal data shows that the percentage of teachers who have been attacked by students has gone from 6% to 10% over just the past 10 years. It's no wonder that they can't get enough teachers, that teachers are leaving the classroom. It's no wonder that there's shortage of teachers. I saw yesterday that there's a call that has gone out. If you're a retired teacher, please come back to the classroom. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know of many retired school teachers who would dare to walk back into the classroom. There's no way. So the K through 12 public schools are just imploding. And they've brought it on themselves. It doesn't have to be this way. It wasn't that way when I went to public schools and when I taught in public schools. It wasn't that way. Another thing is statues and memorials have been toppled and even thrown into the river. Not only Southern memorials, but those of Christopher Columbus and founding fathers. And this is a huge thing that's been going out all through the South in the Confederate monuments. Now, note that they have things with those who served in the North in the war, but they're okay because they're not Southerners. So even though the North had a lot of slavery there and actually brought in the slaves and sold the slaves to the South because it was not profitable to have them in the North, and that's another whole podcast out there. But they don't tear down their monuments. They don't tear it down because they want it to stay there. It seems to be just in the South, and then of course with our founding fathers. The names of streets, schools, buildings have been changed, and many of those names have been changed to those of leftists because we're not supposed to remember anything that went on before. But we're supposed to remember leftists like Cesar Chavez, as we have a street named here in Dallas, and that was a big thorn in our sides when they were taking down the Robert E. Lee statue in Lee Park. And they said this was very offensive and it was about all slavery, which it wasn't. And there were just a few people, a few Marxists they were using that as a reason to take down a statue. They never said a word about a street named after Cesar Chavez over there, and we know he was a left-winger, but that's still up. Taxpayer money is being used by the Pentagon to remove all Southern Confederate heritage because it supposedly represents slavery and racism. This naming commission has given the Pentagon a list of monuments that they wanted removed and a list of the military bases and ships that they wanted to have renamed. Much of this has already happened, so it's gone, it's done. Now, this group is after that. They've already said they want Arlington Cemetery down. That was in the list, and they've been disbanded. However, the question is, now they're trying to take the monument down, and there's a real blowback on there. If you'll go to my website, you're going to find I've written several articles. I've got a new one coming out the first of the week, and then I've also done a podcast on it. It's a big deal, and it's a big deal because this is a national memorial, and it's a monument there. It's a memorial to the buried people there, but it's also a reunification of the North and the South after the Civil War, and this has been worked on by 4 presidents who were involved in it and blessed it and endorsed it. So you might check out my website on that, and then watch for next week if you're on my newsletter to see a new article coming out about that. Well, Christian holidays are now being taken away from employees. Just this past week, Emory Healthcare announced that they're adding Juneteenth, which is June the 19th, to the holiday calendar, and they're removing Christmas Eve. With so much for those people, those Christians who want to take off Christmas Eve, because maybe like some of the rest of you, we attend Christmas services on Christmas Eve. So the whole day is set aside. This is a holiday for us, not just Christmas Day, but all of Christmas Eve, because we do spend the day there in worship, and then in the evening, many Christians are having services or types of things at their home. Well, now this has been taken away, and you're supposed to work that day, but you have a holiday on Juneteenth. Again, go to my website. You'll find an article on Juneteenth and what's wrong with the problem with wrong with it, and also why it was so bad that it was set up as a federal holiday, which is really dumb. There was no reason to do that. The people who benefited are those federal employees who get another paid holiday at our expense. We, the taxpayers, have to pay for that. The old idea that marriage is between a biological male and a biological female is out. It's passé. Is old-fashioned. Now men can give birth to babies, and the term birthing person has replaced the term pregnant woman. The Department of Veteran Affairs just recently started teaching its so-called healthcare providers about encouraging abortions and instructing that men can get pregnant. Would you believe they say put this out in writing, and they're recommending against congratulating a pregnant woman. Instead of a pregnant woman, the approved term is a person who is pregnant. Instead of the term baby or unborn child, the medical providers are supposed to say fetus or embryo, and this is because it takes away that emotional attachment to a baby or an unborn child. And again, this becomes part of this abortion thing. They don't want it to be recognized as a human. This fetus or embryo is totally supposed to have a different connotation. Mother is being replaced by the word person. Well, transgenderism is raging, all the rage of today. It's really a cool thing with corporations supporting it in to their detriment, like Bud Light and Target. In fact, so many of our students are claiming they're transgender. Well, they're not necessarily transgender at all, but it's gotten to be a cool thing. So if you're not transgender, you are supposed to question your gender, then you're not in the in group. And you know, teenagers always, and children, they don't want to be left out. They want to be a part of everything, and they're being told that their parents don't know as much as their teachers do. Now, that's the same thing that students were told under Mao, that the students were told that their parents were not as important or as all-knowing as Mao. But now our students, or the schools, try to divide the parents and the children. Well, we have boys dressing like clownish girls with long eyelashes, painted fingernails, garish makeup, and wigs that are just outlandish. And girls are dressing like boys. If you're wearing a skirt and you're a boy, you can go into a girl's restroom and their dressing rooms and their showers right there with them. And this is all legal. And the girls are not supposed to say anything about it, nor their parents. Well, we're going to see how long that is going to continue going, because this has gotten to be a real problem at the schools, and the parents are just not having it. Well, another thing is real estate brokers are told to use the term primary bedroom instead of master bedroom. Now, I objected the other day when I was talking real estate broker, and they were using that term, and I said, no, the word is master bedroom. No, it's primary bedroom. And I said, no, the word is master bedroom. Master bedroom. You don't use the word primary bedroom. Well, we can change what they think and how they say it if we're willing to stand up to them. Well, churches and synagogues are being burned, and Christians and Jews are being targeted. Communist ideology and its supporters are now the new God, the new religion. It's a secular. It's new. We no longer are supposed to worship Jesus we're no longer as Jews supposed to worship God. And so you see a lot of churches being shut down. In fact, some ministers, even the Christian churches, are saying they don't really believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. They just believe it's something else. And so even on the faculty at SMU, the Southern Methodist University in Texas, rather in Dallas, they're Marxists on that, on the faculty there in the Department of Theology. And you think, how does this happen? How does this work? Well, let's move on. Antifa and BLM protesters have rioted and looted, and they burned down small businesses while the police are told to stand down. Instead of Maoist radicals being arrested, these Marxist Maoists being arrested, those who dare to criticize are targeted by the FBI and the DOJ. With the January 6th FBI staged event in Washington, D.C., there have been a number of innocent people who have been imprisoned for a long time without due process or jury trial. And then others have gone on to have long prison sentences just because they dared to criticize. They dared to criticize the government. And you know, in our Constitution, that's a First Amendment right, is the right to speak your mind. In Dallas County, Texas, thieves are allowed to walk into stores. So if I go downtown in Dallas, I can just walk into a store. I can pick up $750 worth of merchandise, and I can just walk right out. And nobody can say a word, and I don't have to worry about being arrested. So if the store employee tries to stop me or shoot, they're guilty and they go to jail. Well, these thieves can go into other stores, so they can just shop all day long, $750 on each store. And then they go back to the first store. They can just continue. Just think, all they have to do is walk into stores every day. They can get all the clothes, the jewelry, the shoes, household goods, food, everything. It's just all free because the stupid idiots in Dallas are saying, you can't stop them. We have a DA that won't stop them. Schools are using social emotional learning, SEL, to interject critical race theory and radical sex education into lessons to create destabilized, America-hating youth and to train them to become Marxist activists. Confusion and chaos are just sweeping the nation. People daily are psychologically bombarded by events in the mainstream so that mental illness has become a huge crisis. It's a problem, a real problem among our youth, and we have suicide rates are up. But it's just what they're experiencing in the schools is really problematic. What people are experiencing in the military, in government, in everywhere, in corporations. And if you want to keep your job, you just stay quiet and you pretend you go along, but at some point this becomes very problematic with people because it becomes a moral and ethic problem for them, ethical problem for them. The wokesters call conservatives racist, they call us sexist, homophobes, transphobes, and even a basket of deplorables, as Miss Hillary called us. Well, identity politics, as Maoists had identity politics, of, remember, the red classes and the black classes? Well, we use them here in the United States, and it's to divide people, but not along red classes and black classes. The Marxist critical theorists have weaponized these terms, and they're using whites against people of color. So, and they're tapping into this guilt. They go back into, this is why they want to do a big deal about slavery and the Confederate statues. They've been working on this idea of the slavery, which the whole thing is just a farce of what they're talking about. They've just totally changed up history. And I will say that I did teach history, and I taught Southern history, and as well as being a classical pianist and organist, and I taught music as well. So I can see how the history has changed dramatically since, I was actually teaching that. Well, this Maoist concept of class was a state of mind, not birth. In America, race is supposed to be the defining factor of all American culture and society. Whites oppress blacks. Whites are the oppressors, blacks are the oppressed. But it's not that simple, because black can be white. With Maoist wokeism, black conservatives such as Candace Owens and Larry Elder, they're called white supremacists because of their political opinions rather than their skin color. They simply have incorrect opinions. They're politically incorrect. Therefore, they're white supremacists, regardless of their skin color. Well, people are being encouraged to snitch on each other. But Mao did this, but you will find all dictators do it. This is how they keep people in line, is they try to create a citizen police. And the people are supposed to encourage to snitch on friends, neighbors, families, and report them to the government or whatever for non-criminal hate incidents, or for what they say, well, it's just a hate crime or it's a hate incident. Maybe it's not at all. Maybe your neighbor one day is watching out the window and you do something that neighbor thinks is just not the right thing. And so that neighbor just calls in a complaint on you, and then it's up to you to defend yourself. Well, there's a group out in California, and it's other places, but there's just one that I saw in the news a couple of days ago. It's called California versus Hate, and they have a hotline. It's a tip line, and it encourages people to snitch on each other and to report them to the government for non-criminal hate incidents. Some of these are encouraged, but other groups are encouraged to report people to the FBI. Well, this tip line is to report them to the government, local government, for non-criminal hate incidents. Now, this service, this hotline, is funded by Kaiser Permanente and Blue Shield of California, and those are insurance, they're HMO insurers. Now, also other nonprofits and corporate organizations are also funding this. And this hotline gets federal funding from the American Rescue Plan. That's a federal funding, as well as from local governments. But nowhere on the website you're going to find information about what constitutes hate. So the neighbor can just say, hey, that this was a hate crime. Well, what is hate? Tell me what hate is. What did I do that was hate? And you see, this is what a living constitution is about. It changes. Instead of something being like the rule of law where it's on paper, this is the law. When you have something, a living constitution, it changes. It changes by the moment, depending on who is in front of the judge or whatever. And this is a very dangerous thing, to have a living constitution. It's not living. It's a constitution is written. It's in writing. Our media is controlled by the left, as you know by now, and it pushes out daily propaganda, and it targets dissidents and does everything to cancel people. Well, these are just a few of the millions of examples of how Maoism has totally engulfed our nation, our daily lives, and our churches, our schools, our governments. I'm talking about at all levels: federal, state, local, corporations of all sizes, the medical industry, the drug industry, big pharma, law, the legal profession, courts, the arts, entertainment, Hollywood. No institution has escaped Maoism. So I hope that you now have a better understanding of what's happening around you and why. And I urge you to take a stand, and as I said earlier, and refuse to let the left dictate what you can think or what you can say. They can only win if we go along with their radical agenda. And I think the people are now beginning to wake up. And this reminds me always of the Pearl Harbor, the movie about Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese generals say, I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant. I think this is what's happening in America, and this is why the left is fighting back even more. They're worried that they might be losing, so they're fighting back. So we just have to put the press on a lot more. Now, there is one other topic that I didn't cover today because it needs an entire episode devoted entirely to that topic, and that is education. And as you know, that's the area that my doctoral work is in. I'm a education policy analyst and expert in curriculum. Mao dramatically changed education in China, and we're seeing that influence in our own schools. So watch for an upcoming podcast episode in which I'm going to discuss how to recognize Maoism in American schools. Well, folks, this about wraps up this episode, and I thank you for joining me. I'd really love to hear from you. If you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share with me, or maybe a topic you'd like for me to discuss in another episode, please write to me at this email address, chaynes777@gmail.com. That's CHAYNES777@gmail.com. Also, again, please check out my website, www.maoism, Dr. Carole H. Haynes. I spelled www.drcarolehaynes.com. There you'll find a number of other podcasts there and a lot of commentary, hundreds and hundreds of commentaries. Please also subscribe to my Facebook, my Rumble accounts, and also to the YouTube account. So you might check me out at Facebook, but also subscribe to my YouTube and Rumble accounts and also my podcast channels. So that's it for today. Thank you again.